as I explained, we're going to give some information to our family as to who are the Moravians and what is our connection to those Moravians. And first, right now, Sarah Dreydoppel, who's a member of the Schoeneck Moravian Church, and she's very busy at that church. Not only is she a Sunday school teacher, and she sings in the choir and participates in the handbell choir, but she also participates in the summer program, the Vacation Bible School, and has participated in many different committees at the church. She is also very intimately acquainted with the Moravian Historical Society, and when she has free time, she teaches school in the Bethlehem School District. So I'm going to turn things over to Sarah and let her take things away. Sarah, please.
Thank you. And I'm going to share my screen so that we can see the slides. Can we all see that? And we've got to present slideshow. Everybody okay so far? All right, so who are the Moravians? And apologies if my Wi-Fi cuts out. It seems to have been cut out earlier today. But the short answer to who are the Moravians is Moravians are a mainline Protestant denomination, similar to Lutheran, Methodist, Episcopal, Presbyterian, religions like that. It's one of the oldest Protestant denominations, dating back to 1457. So this is before Martin Luther. This is pre-Reformation. Today it's over 1 million members worldwide. But now we're going to get into the longer answer and all of the details of that. So we're starting with John Huss. John Huss was a Catholic priest. He's living in the 1300s and 1400s in the Czech Republic, in Prague, the regions of Bohemia and Moravia. That's where we get the title Moravians, because they're the people from Moravia. So John Huss, again, he was a Catholic priest. He did not set out to start a new religion. He just wanted to see reform in the Catholic Church. He wanted Bibles to be printed in the language of the people instead of Latin, which only wealthy, educated people could understand. He wanted church services preached in the language of the people. Again, this would be in Czech, since he's in the Czech Republic. He didn't like indulgences. That was a big thing going on in the Catholic Church at the time. He wanted all people to have access to both elements in communion. At that time, it was just the bread that was offered to the common people, and only the priest had the cup, and a variety of other reasons. He just wanted to see reform within the church. He preached in Bethlehem Chapel in Prague. So we've got a couple modern day pictures of what that location is like. You can see these pictures are all set up with chairs, but at the time it would be standing room only. And because he's preaching in the language of the people, he's speaking so that they can understand. So he's drawing very, very large crowds. Everyone wants to come and hear him preach because they know what he's saying, because they understand what's going on. So imagine, instead of all of those chairs in the pictures, wall-to-wall people who are trying to hear him preach. So he's very, very well known for his preaching. They even tell stories about people would stand outside the windows and try to listen in if there wasn't any room inside. The Catholic Church didn't like what he was doing, though, and so they basically brought him to trial and tried to get him to recant all of his beliefs, and was very important for him to not give up his faith. He stayed strong until the end. Sadly, the Catholic Church did end up burning him at the stake in 1415. But because he had all of these followers, because he had all of these people who were listening to him, because they could understand him, even after his death, they continued to meet together and worship together and gather together and sing together. And so in 1457, they were able to, 1457, they were able to officially organize themselves as a church called the Unitas Fratrum, or Unity of the Brethren. This is still in the Czech Republic. The picture that you see here is a very small house that is there. Today, this building is a museum. It's got a small museum on the inside. But now we have the foundations of a church. And again, this is all before Martin Luther. This is before all of those other big name religious names that you hear from the time of the Enlightenment, the Great Awakening, all of that. A lot of historians say that the difference between Martin Luther and John Huss, and so the only way for him to get his ideas out were by word of mouth, by preaching when people came to see him. And then also because of what he was able to write down on his own. Martin Luther, being about 100 years later, had much more technologically advanced, printing press, ways to get his ideas out there. But he was inspired by John Huss's ideas. And many of those other big names of the day were inspired by what they read of John Huss. So the church itself, again, 1457 is when it was founded. And eventually the church was able to get its own printing presses. So within the church, they were able to create their own Bibles, get more ideas out that way. At this time, the church is growing in the Czech Republic, in the regions of Moravia and Bohemia, as we spoke of before, and it's with Martin Luther and all of the other big names. Now we're starting to get this religious tension going on in Europe. So you've got Catholic versus Protestants, you've got 30 Years' War kind of thing happening on, you've got religious persecution, depending on what your local leadership and government, what their choice of religion was. Some people were persecuted because of their faith, some people needed to flee or leave, or some people became refugees. So at this time, the Moravian Church, the Unitas Fratrum, basically goes underground. The people are meeting in secret, singing very, very quietly, having to hide their Bibles just for fear of persecution. This time in the church, we've got John Amos Comenius. He was a bishop of the church and one of the major leaders at the time. He to Poland, where they had a little bit more religious freedom at the time. He's also known in historical circles for his incredible work in education and all of the important writings that he did. But at this point, the church is still not totally safe, still to many degrees underground, still in hiding, basically, depending on where in Europe you are. So then finally, we get to Count Nicholas Ludwig von Zinzendorf. Now we're into the 1720s. So Count Zinzendorf is a German nobleman. We've got map of Germany right there. He's living in Hriniak, which is right along the border between Germany and Poland and the Czech Republic. There are places in the town where if you look one direction, you can see one country. If you look another direction, you can see the other country. He was Lutheran, and he, as good German noblemen do, he was on a tour of Europe and was inspired by a painting that he saw of Jesus on the cross, and the inscription was, "This I have done for you, what have you done for me?" And that really made him think. He thought, oh, what am I doing for Jesus? What am I doing for my faith? I should be doing more than I am doing right now. So as he finished up his tour of Europe, he started to hear about these Moravian refugees, these people who needed to hide their Bibles and meet in secret and sing very, very quietly for fear of the authorities. And so he thought, I am a German nobleman. I've got all of this land. I might as well do something with this land and help out all of. Invited the Moravians to come to his lands where they would have religious freedom. So that brings us to, here's another image of the town of Hriniak. So we've got not just Moravians at this time, we've got other religious groups as well. But he's got all of these groups coming to his land. This is in 1722. And for the first couple of years that they're all gathered there, they're just trying to figure out how can they live in community with each other. Many of them are coming from different backgrounds, even though they are refugees, they have that in common, and they have their faith, they have that in common. There is still some division between them. There is still some conflict between them. So Zinzendorf worked very, very carefully with these people, figuring out what is most important priority that they want to focus on. And over the course of time, in working with these people, in visiting with them, in praying with them, he's kind of helping to guide them into a common community. And so that leads us to 1727. This is where we get the renewed Moravian Church. So this image that we see here is Berthelsdorf Church. Berthelsdorf is the next town over from Herrnhut. This is where the community would have been worshiping at the time. And so on August 13th, 1727, the community has gathered for worship. And all of a sudden, they feel the presence of the Holy Spirit. This is a very moving experience for them. This is a very significant experience for them. And the feeling is that even though they know that there has been conflict and division, all want to be together in Christian love, and they all want to move forward together as one group. So this is where we get the big renewal, very big moments in the history of the Moravian Church. So from here, this is where a lot of our current Moravian traditions that we know of today come from. So we're going to talk about a few of those. We've got the Love Feast. This is a modern Moravian tradition, which is celebrated for special events in churches in the middle of the church service. So hymns are sung, a simple meal is shared. The idea is that everyone is sharing unity in Christ, sitting down together for a simple meal as a family would sit down together for dinner. It is not a sacrament. It's not like communion. It's something totally different. Events in the church year. But again, the Love Feast stems from that August 13th experience in 1727, where after that church service, nobody wanted to go home. Everyone wanted to stand around. Everyone wanted to talk and continue their dialogue. And so Count Zinzendorf sent out for lunch to be delivered. And so that way everyone was able to eat together, partake together, and continue that conversation and be together in Christ. So the next one that we've got is Christmas Eve candles. We've got a few pictures of Christmas Eve at Schoeneck over the years. So this is a tradition. The candle is a visual representation of Jesus. It's a beeswax candle, beeswax being the purest form of wax, so representing the purity of Jesus. The red frill representing that Christ is the light of the world. So this is just a Christmas tradition or Christmas Eve. Doesn't necessarily go along with every love feast that happens throughout the church year, but definitely a beloved Moravian tradition. We've got the Advent Star as a geometry project at the Moravian Boys' School in Niski, Germany. Where the professor said, take these squares and these triangles and put them together and figure out the shapes that they make. And so the boys came up with this star shape and then realized that this is reminding them of the star that led the wise men to Jesus. So the Advent Star tradition is traditionally lit on the first Sunday of Advent in Moravian congregations. There are and some people leave them out year round. Some people just have them up for the Advent season. We've also got the folded Moravian stars. So those are the ones on the left there. Joanne made those. So the folded stars are a little bit different shape, but the same idea, star being an important symbol of the Moravian Church. We've also got the choir system. This is something that developed in the 1720s in Herrnhut. This is the idea that when you are sharing and perhaps doing your Bible study or working together with those around you, it's more conducive to share if you are organized by marital status, gender, different stations in life. So the choir system was with so choir system, there is a choir for younger children, boys and girls, single people, so single brothers and single sisters, married people, and widows and widowers. We can see on the right side there with what the women are wearing, they've got different colored ribbons, and that denotes their choir status. So red was for little girls, pink was for single sisters, blue was for married women, and white was for widows. The men didn't wear ribbons, but they had a similar choir system as well, similar choirs. So your choir is who you're living with, working with, worshiping with, sharing your meals with. In the more organized and communities, there were special or specific houses and buildings for all of these choirs. So there was a building for all of the to live in. There was a building for the married people. There was a nursery for the children to live in. So choir system, a way to organize based on stations in life, if you will. So we've also got the lots. That was something that people were asking about. This is the way that major decisions were made for various Moravian communities and settlements. Big decisions like, should we start a settlement in a new country? Should we send a mission, or should we start a mission station in a new country or a new town? Should we build buildings? Should we, whatever the major decisions of the community would be, they were brought to the lot. So inside the box are papers that say Ja and Nein for yes and no, because we're speaking German at this point. The idea was that we pray about this decision very, very much, whatever the decision is that we need to make sure that all of our hearts are ready for this decision. We need to know what is the will of God for this decision. We need to know what is going to be the best decision for the community in moving forward. So they would pray about this very much. And then whatever the issue was, if the paper said yes, they would take a paper out of the box. If the paper said yes, then that is how they proceeded. If the paper said no, that is how they proceeded. And if it was blank, that meant they needed to pray about it some more, give it some more thought, that it wasn't a yes, it wasn't a no, it just wasn't the time to be dealing with that issue at that time. So we've got music. Music was and still is very their own music. They are singing their own music. They're performing their own music. They're making their own instruments at this point. So we can see a trombone choir. Rich was talking about, there's a great picture from Schoeneck from several years ago of the trombone choir that was at that time. But trombone choir and brass choirs and music in general, still very, very important to the Moravians. We've got the Easter sunrise service. Many of you are probably familiar with that tradition. So on Easter, meeting very, very early at the church, some members staying up all night just so that they don't sleep through it. So it begins at the church, and then everyone walks to the cemetery, walks to God's acre, reminiscent of the very first Easter there. But this tradition did start in Herrnhut in the 1700s. Was the Single Brothers Choir that started out that tradition. Presumably they're staying up all night as young men would do. And then they all decided, let's go to the cemetery and see the sun come up, just like that very first Easter. So traditions that are very much beloved today, that we all love today, started out because the guys wanted to stay up all night. So then we've got Moravian missions. Starting in about 1732, the Moravians decided that a major focus of the church moving forward mission work. Were inspired by stories of slaves from the Caribbean. The slaves wanted to go to church and the masters would not let them. That they felt these people who were not allowed to go to church. So the story goes, they went willing to become slaves themselves. They basically sold themselves in order to pay for their passage to get to the Caribbean. But then once they got there, they were able to work alongside all of these people, live alongside them, and in that way share their faith. And so that's where we get our idea for Moravian missions today, and the philosophy that we're going to go and bring church to people who do not have access to church. We're going to send people to preach where there is no one to preach to the people there. The idea being, if you've already got your own church, if you've already got your own faith, that's great. We're not going to try to convert you otherwise. But if you want you. That's going to be important in talks about how the Clewells ended up in the Schoeneck area. So then we've also got the concept of closed communities and the general economy. So as the Moravians are expanding and sending out missionaries to all parts of the world. Eventually, mission work was done on 6 of the 7 continents. There was no mission work done on Antarctica. I guess the penguins didn't need anyone to bring church to them. But with all of this expansion and sending out missionaries into the world, we were also seeing settlements to support those mission activities. And so the idea of the closed community is that this is a settlement that is where Moravians are to live in order to send their missionaries out to where they're going to go. A Moravian in order to live there. Moravians are very hospitable of visitors. They're very welcoming to visitors, but you can't live in the community unless you're a Moravian. And that also leads into the general economy. So this is what's happening in the 1700s as well, when Moravians are starting new settlements, is again, going back to the idea of the choir system. You've got all of these various buildings, and then each choir is doing their work together, doing their trades together, doing their worship time together, their devotion times together, their meal times together. So organization of the settlements and of the communities. So that brings us to, how did we get to Nazareth? How did we get to the colonies? How did we get to Pennsylvania? The Moravians sent out a mission to Georgia. They went to Savannah. They tried to get a mission going with the Native Americans. They tried really, really hard for 5 years, and it just wasn't working. So at that point, some of the Moravians just left the church altogether. Some Germany. Some of them came to Pennsylvania. They were hired by George Whitefield, who is another big name in religious circles. So he's an English evangelist. He had some property here in Pennsylvania, and he wanted to start a school for orphan slave children. But he was very well known for preaching all over the colonies, and he was a little busy in other colonies preaching, and so he didn't have time to go and build the school himself. So he met up with the Moravians, and he sent them to Pennsylvania and said, go and build the school. So they went to Nazareth, they found the property, they the school. 1740 was a very rainy summer, so they didn't get much progress done on the school. In that time, they ended up getting into a theological disagreement with George Whitefield as well. And so it became apparent that the Moravians needed to leave the Nazareth property. Some historians say that Merce just decided to leave quietly. Some historians say that Whitefield kicked those Moravians off of his land. So you're welcome to believe whoever you would like, but it's in the spring of 1741 that the Moravians go to Bethlehem. So that's a fact that not a lot of people know about, is that Nazareth did come before Bethlehem. Bethlehem doesn't like to admit that. But they went to Bethlehem in 1741. And then George Whitefield's financial agent passed away. His money was not being property. So he sold the property to the Moravians. They bought it back from him. So now they own the Bethlehem property and the Nazareth property. So it's decided that Bethlehem and Nazareth are going to work together to be the base of operations for all of the Moravian mission work in the colonies. So they send some caretakers back to Nazareth. This is all while they're getting the Bethlehem community started. So they're building the buildings, getting everything organized in Bethlehem. In 1743, they're able to send in the construction team, finish building the Whitefield house. That's the stone building that is pictured there. Since George Whitefield is no longer involved in this project, then it doesn't need to be a school. Whatever the Moravians needed it. There were several Moravians that had recently arrived from Germany. So if you've got all of these people who need a place to stay, here's a big building where they can stay. And, so the mission work takes off. The building that you see there, the Whitefield House, is used as the children's nursery. It's used as the girls' school. It's used as the theological seminary. Now that is the headquarters of the Society. But then we get this idea of Nazareth and Bethlehem working together as the major Moravian settlement in the colonies. So now that Nazareth has been established and is moving forward, that's where we get to Schoeneck. This is where Schoeneck comes into the story. And that's going to be where we pick things up in 2 weeks when Sue gives up. So do we have any questions, or did I cut out? Did everyone get all of that? I will stop sharing my screen so we can bring it back to conversation.
Let me get people unmuted here. And yes, you popped out a number of times.
I apologize for that. What do we need to clarify?
You went through so many good points. It's kind of like, oh, do any of you have questions?
So much to talk about.
Everybody is unmuted except for my sister, so you should all be able to talk. Something in the history. Go ahead, Peter.
The choir system was rather interesting in the fact that the same choir system, or a similar, maybe a little different in color, was also very present with the Amish. They also do that. The women, once they're married, wear black, but the young girls wear pink and green, and to show whether or not they're of age and whether they can be married. And so it's fascinating to see that. I didn't realize the Moravians actually did that too.
Yeah, the various colors of ribbons for the women were helpful in showing their status and whether they were married or single or whatnot. But part of it was also this idea of, this is our group, this is our, kind of like our club almost. Is that if you think about, colleges and universities today, they all have their own colors, or various organizations have their own colors. So this is a way for the women to say, this is our group, this is our choir, this is our, yay team, yay single sisters, yay little girls, whoever it is. Yeah.
Something that's also interesting about the cemetery at Schoeneck, the old cemetery I'm talking about, and that is you can go to one point and you can see kind of a little dividing line that the women are buried on the one side and the men are buried on the other, and even children are buried in other sections. So that was a not only was it a part of the community as in the church and that sort of thing, but even they buried people according to the choir system. So anything else? One of the things that I know there's always been this battle between Nazareth and Bethlehem. Is it 1740, 1741, and we're older than you guys, blah, blah, blah. But 1737 is when Louisa and her two sons arrived. So they were in America before the establishment of Nazareth. And now, of course, they will travel out to Ole. At least Louisa does. The boys are left behind to pay off their transportation. But they were there just a little bit before the Moravian establishment. And this is something I hope Sue is able to answer. I've never understood why the families would leave Ole, where there's basically security, protection. They probably had jobs and so forth. And they went out to this wilderness just north of Nazareth. And it was a wilderness. There was nobody out there.
There was nothing here at the time. It was the middle of nowhere.
What was it that called them to go out there? And I don't know if Sue will be able to answer that or not, but that's always been one of the perplexing things in the back of my mind. And Franz and his wife would have a baby just a few months, I believe, before they take off. So they're taking a little baby with them and going to an area where it's completely unestablished. So that's one of the things that's always been perplexing to me and that sort of thing. But other questions?
Do they still use the lot system within the Moravian Church?
Not the way that that they did historically. To some degree, it's still used in a form of that. Major church decisions, basically for voting for various positions of the church, in the fact that it's not a yes or a no or a blank. It's that various names written down without nomination.
I had heard, or I think I might have read in the 1907 book, that Louisa had gotten 2 votes and did not get a positive vote to be able to join the Moravian Church. And therefore she never did join the church, even though both her sons were eventually, the older son was obviously in, because I think he might have been working for Whitfield when he got here in 1737 and worked there till 1740 when the land was sold. But I was wondering if anybody else remembers that Louisa was not part of the church.
Yeah, initially, at least what I can remember, we're all getting older and forget half of this stuff, but yeah, she was denied at one point, but eventually I do believe, maybe Sue remembers something she read, but I do believe she was eventually accepted into the group.
Yeah, I think in her very last years or so, I think she had been accepted into the group.
Yeah,
but
I think so.
But one of the stories about the Lots and the Clewells, and I'm sorry I don't know which one it was, but he was a widower, and he wanted to marry one of the particular ladies, let's say Lady A. And the church said no, and they cast lots, and they said, no, you have to marry Lady B. And he said, forget it, I'm taking Lady A, or I'm taking none of them. And so he married Lady A. I forget the names and everything, but I thought that was remarkable that they were using the lot system to determine who he could remarry. And he wasn't going to have any part of it. So